It's August 5th, 2019, and it's time to review 5 of the most outrageous, infuriating, or just plain baffling things that have happened lately. It's your Facepalm 5. Let's count them up. Number 1. Migrant family separations continued after court order to stop. The separation of migrant children from their parents at the U.S. southern border is perhaps the defining cruelty of the Trump administration. A federal judge ordered a stop to the practice over a year ago, and Trump ordered officials to comply with the order. But now, in court documents filed last week, the American Civil Liberties Union has revealed that family separations continued after the court order, with nearly 1,000 children having been taken from their families since. The official justification for these additional separations is that they were done for the protection of the children. The court order and Trump's own directive did allow for separations to continue in cases where the parents were judged to be a danger to the well-being of the children. But the ACLU, citing the government's own statistics, said that many of the parents who lost their children as a result of their criminal histories had committed only minor offenses, such as destruction of property or disorderly conduct. One migrant mentioned in the filing claims his daughter was taken from him because a Border Patrol agent accused him of not changing the child's diaper. Two things here. First, this should not surprise us. Ever since family separation was supposedly halted, there have been reports from sources within the Trump White House that various officials, including Trump himself, would like to resume the practice. So it's hardly shocking to learn that it never actually stopped to begin with. Second, it hopefully goes without saying that this was never about protecting children from risk. The practice of large-scale family separation was instituted in the first place with the intention of discouraging families seeking asylum from crossing the border. It was designed to be cruel and inhumane. It didn't work because most of those families who had made the long trek through Mexico to the U.S. border had already decided that the violence and turmoil of their home countries was worse than whatever waited for them here, even with the Trump administration in charge. These parents made this decision because, unlike Trump and his agents at the border, they actually were trying to protect their families from risk. They were rewarded for their courage and endurance by being treated like criminals and having their children abducted by the government to which they had turned for refuge. This isn't a problem we can trust the Trump administration to fix because to them, separating migrant families isn't the problem. The families themselves are the problem. But the truth is that for as long as it's allowed to remain in power, this administration is the most urgent and perilous problem faced by every one of us. Number 2, in shocking twist, Ronald Reagan turns out to have been racist. In case you haven't heard yet, I've got some news. I hope you're sitting down. Ronald Reagan was a racist. Pause the video, take a second to pull yourself together if you need to. I know none of us saw this coming. Last week, Tim Naftali wrote an article in The Atlantic about recently released audio of a conversation between Reagan and then-President Richard Nixon. The conversation took place in 1971 following a vote at the United Nations to officially recognize the People's Republic of China. Reagan apparently called Nixon to vent about the UN delegates who had voted against the US, particularly the representatives of African nations. After the UN General Assembly voted to recognize the Beijing government as the official government of China, the delegation from Tanzania danced in celebration. Speaking to Nixon, Reagan said,
"Last night, I tell you, to watch that thing on television as I did, to see those monkeys from those African countries, damn them, they're still uncomfortable wearing shoes."
Many people who have been unabashed admirers of Reagan have expressed disappointment at this recording. Many others have insisted that we not judge Reagan too harshly. The day after the Atlantic article was published, the Reagan Foundation tweeted this photo of a smiling Reagan along with the quote, "We can preserve the dream of America. We need all our people, men and women, young and old, individuals of every race, to be happy, healthy, and whole. And that's what our job is all about. Because if he was racist, how could he have said a not racist thing? Right-wing magazine The American Spectator went even further, printing a piece by Reagan biographer and PragerU contributor Paul Kengor, in which Kengor declares, quote, "Ronald Reagan was not a racist. This is the only, and I mean only, statement that I've ever read from him like this, and I've read just about everything." Kengor then attempts to explain away the apparent racism Reagan exhibits in the Nixon recording, writing, quote, "It sounds like he might be mocking a racist stereotype. I honestly can't tell for certain. Given that Reagan never spoke this way and didn't think this way, one ought to be inclined to give him the benefit of the doubt." Kengor goes on to complain of how unfair it is to declare Reagan a racist based on this one statement. The thing is, it's not just this one statement. Those monkeys from those African countries might be the only time Reagan was ever caught saying something explicitly racist, and to suggest that it's anything other than racist goes beyond benefit of the doubt to an entirely unwarranted, almost delusional level of deference. But throughout his political career, Reagan supported and carried out racist policies and exhibited other indications of his own racist attitudes and assumptions. It was Reagan who popularized the stereotype of black women as welfare queens. It was Reagan who presided over the escalation of the war on drugs in the 1980s, which disproportionately affected people of color and helped to reinforce the one-dimensional perception of black communities as overrun with drugs and violent crime. And, as Naftali notes in his Atlantic article, Reagan supported the apartheid regimes of South Africa and Rhodesia. It was even an issue in Reagan's 1976 primary race against sitting president and fellow Republican Gerald Ford. So, in a way, I get it. Republicans, many of whom are stubbornly oblivious to their own racism, are defending Reagan because he's long since displaced Abraham Lincoln as the unblemished marble man of their party. But there's no reason why the rest of us have to go along with them. We should call the attitudes toward non-white people demonstrated by Reagan's words on the Nixon tape and the aforementioned policies he supported throughout his life what they are: racist. And we should be willing to speak up and explain to his defenders why racism doesn't have to be blunt and crude and openly hateful in order to be harmful. Racism like Reagan's is much more difficult to detect, and all the more dangerous because of it. Number 3, Mueller testimony criticized as bad TV. Week before last, Robert Mueller testified before Congress about the special counsel investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election and the relationship of the Trump campaign to that interference. Mueller didn't tell us anything we didn't already know. His testimony didn't go beyond what is already contained in the report, which is something we should have expected going in. Mueller made it clear during his brief remarks to the press following the conclusion of the investigation that the report itself would be his final statement on the subject, and that he was either unable or unwilling to discuss related issues that fell outside the bounds of his investigation. Mueller's testimony offered nothing earth-shattering or unexpected, but that didn't bother me. What bothered me was how his appearance before Congress was framed by a sizable portion of the mainstream media. A lot of that framing is captured in this AP article by David Bowder, printed under the headline, "Mueller Hearing Makes for Less Than Compelling TV Drama." The article quotes NBC's Chuck Todd acknowledging the significance of Mueller's testimony, particularly Mueller's confirmation that the only reason Trump wasn't charged with a crime is because of Justice Department policy to not indict a sitting president. But Todd follows that up with, quote, "On optics, this was a disaster." He wasn't the only one who seemed less concerned with the content of Mueller's testimony than with how it was playing on TV. New York Times reporters Adam Goldman and Maggie Haberman didn't even wait for Mueller to finish testifying before speculating that this would all be forgotten by the next day's news cycle, if not before. It's frustrating and more than a little alarming to see Mueller tell members of Congress that the only reason the President of the United States wasn't charged with obstructing justice was because of a Justice Department memo saying they can't do it while he's in office, and then to see some of the most prominent journalists in the country focus their reporting and commentary on Mueller's lack of charisma. If you think the optics might prevent people from paying close enough attention to the substance of Mueller's testimony, i.e. that the president is a criminal, then maybe instead of focusing on the optics, you should focus on the substance, people who report the news. All this passing of the buck, talking about the news cycle as though it's some kind of freestanding entity. The news cycle consists of news stories that people like Chuck Todd and Maggie Haberman and Adam Goldman write and talk about. You say you're reporters? You say your job is to report the news, not to make the news? Fine, report the news. The President of the United States obstructed justice, and his office is the only thing shielding him from prosecution. Sorry if that's not sufficiently thrilling for the folks watching at home, but unless you're a fucking TV critic, that's really not your concern, is it? Stop writing about this administration like you're reviewing a goddamn soap opera and start doing what you say your jobs are. Number 4, gun store uses images of the squad on billboard. Cherokee Guns, a firearms retailer in North Carolina, is owned and operated by Doc Wachholtz. If that name sounds familiar to you, it might be because Wachholtz is also a musician, best known as the longtime drummer in the band Savatage. Last week, Wachholtz made headlines for putting up this billboard, which features images of the 4 members of Congress known informally as the Squad: Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, and Ayanna Pressley. Text on the board also likens the 4 women to the Bible's 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. Congresswoman Tlaib tweeted about the billboard asking the, it seems to me, rather reasonable question, how the hell is this not inciting violence? All 4 members of the squad have been targets of right-wing anger and abuse for their support of progressive policies and their outspoken opposition to Donald Trump. Ilhan Omar, in particular, has been subjected to racist harassment from Trump himself and has received numerous death threats. So putting their pictures on a billboard for a gun store owned by a right-wing extremist? To borrow a phrase from the previous segment, the optics are a disaster. For his part, Wachholtz insists that there's nothing threatening or racist about the billboard. He says he targeted Omar, Ocasio-Cortez, Tlaib, and Pressley not because of their skin colors, but because of their, quote, socialist beliefs. He told the Citizen Times, quote, I'm not inciting any violence or being racist. It's a statement. It's an opinion, unquote. I mean, a statement or an opinion can still incite violence, Doc. For instance, this next statement of yours printed in the Citizen Times, where you go on to say, quote, I also feel a couple of them, being Muslim, have ties to actual terrorists groups. Assuming that merely being Muslim is enough to place you under suspicion for having ties to terrorists might not necessarily be racist, though anti-Muslim statements like this are often informed by racism against Middle Eastern people, but it's definitely an ignorant, prejudiced thing to say. It would be like if I said about you, Doc, that you probably have ties to terrorist groups because you, like most people who commit acts of terrorism in the United States, are a white man with right-wing political beliefs. But it wouldn't be fair for me to accuse you of being a terrorist on the basis of your race and your politics, Doc. That's why I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're a racist, Trump-loving shithead on the basis of, well, pretty much everything I know about you. By the way, the advertising agency that owns the billboard has announced it's taking down the sign depicting the squad, so at least there's that. Better late than never, huh? Now it's time for the segment devoted to some of the other things Donald Trump has done recently to disgrace the presidency and embarrass and/or endanger the United States and the rest of the world. It's number 5, the further misadventures of Lord Dampnut. Please keep in mind, as always, the following is not a complete list. Let me quickly run through a few of these before I get to the one I really want to talk about. He tweeted that he's considering labeling Antifa a terrorist organization and compared it to MS-13. He lied about spending time at Ground Zero at a signing ceremony for legislation funding medical care for 9/11 first responders, saying that he spent a lot of time down there in the complete absence of evidence that he did that, and insisting, quote, "I'm not going to consider myself a first responder." Yes, I'm sure we're all just in awe of your humility. He reacted to one of the recent Democratic primary debates, complaining about a question from CNN anchor Don Lemon that referenced Trump's flagrant and undeniable racism by tweeting, "I am the least racist person in the world." And notice the quotes there. I'm pretty sure he's quoting himself. Also notice that he once again refers to Don Lemon as the dumbest man on television. Hey, I know what'll show him I'm not racist. I'll insult the black journalist while saying I'm not racist. Trump, you're a genius. You've done it again. Thank you, Trump. It was nothing, really. No, Trump, you're too modest. Learn to take a compliment. Well, okay, Trump, now that you mention it, I guess I am pretty brilliant. And totally not racist. Don't forget that. Anyway, on the subject of how racist he is, Don Lemon's question during that debate about Trump's racism was inspired by Trump's recent attacks on Congressman Elijah Cummings, and beyond that, the city of Baltimore, about half of which sits in Representative Cummings' congressional district. On July 27th, Trump tweeted, "Representative Elijah Cummings has been a brutal bully, shouting and screaming at the great men and women of Border Patrol about conditions at the southern border, when actually his Baltimore district is far worse and more dangerous. His district is considered the worst in the USA. As proven last week during a congressional tour, the border is clean, efficient, and well run, just very crowded. Cummings' district is a disgusting, rat and rodent-infested mess. If he spent more time in Baltimore, maybe he could help clean up this very dangerous and filthy place." Trump's attacks on Representative Cummings fall into two of his most familiar patterns. Cummings is not only an outspoken critic of Trump, as the chair of the House Oversight Committee, he is a potential threat, and Trump impulsively lashes out at anyone he perceives as a threat to his power or self-image. And Cummings is black, and Trump is a racist who attempts to bully and belittle people of color in order to energize his supporters, who are also racists. Trump also tweeted, "Why is so much money sent to the Elijah Cummings district when it is considered the worst run and most dangerous anywhere in the United States? No human being would want to live there. Where is all this money going? How much is stolen? Investigate this corrupt mess immediately." Besides being racist and an attack on an enemy, this tweet falls into a third familiar pattern for Trump. It's a deranged lie. While it's true that much of Baltimore, including neighborhoods in Cummings' district, struggles with the challenges of poverty and crime, as a whole, Cummings' district is among the wealthiest majority black districts in the country. According to Nate Silver, it also has above-average college education rates and home prices, and let's not forget that it's also home to Johns Hopkins University and the world-renowned Johns Hopkins Hospital. And while the population of the district is 53% black, it's also 36% white. Presumably, Trump at least considers them to be human beings. Well, the cis-hetero ones anyway. But really, all of this is beside the point. If Trump's characterization of Cummings' district and the city of Baltimore in general as a post-apocalyptic hellhole was accurate, his reaction, "Why are we spending so much money on this place?" is the opposite of the one you'd hope for from the President of the United States. Or, any human being with a shred of empathy or decency. Look, I've lived in Western Maryland my entire life. I'm a little over an hour's drive from Baltimore as I sit here recording this. Trump's attitude toward the city, his racist, poverty-shaming, dehumanizing dismissal of Baltimore and its people is shared by quite a few white people in this area. And the bigotry and ignorance that inform that attitude are unmistakable. Some of Trump's supporters might cite the fact that his opinions on this matter are widely held as evidence that there's no problem here, but for me, that only underlines how serious and how much bigger than Trump himself the problem really is. That's 5. Speak out, act out, resist, look after each other. Hey folks, hope you got something out of this one. If you did, please click like and share the video and subscribe to the channel if you're not subbed already. And also please consider helping me to keep making videos like this one and like all the videos I make on this channel by becoming a supporter of this channel with a monthly donation through Patreon. You can go to patreon.com/Steve Shives to become a patron for as little as $1 a month. And believe me, those $1 a month pledges really add up and help me out tremendously. But if you can afford it and you think I'm worth it, and you pledge at $5 a month or more, you get yourself a shout out at the end of the Facepalm 5, just like these folks, my newest $5 or more per month patrons. Trent Sutherland, thank you, Trent. Riley Hall, thank you, Riley. Mick Ronix, thank you, Mick Ronix. Edwin Peng, thank you, Edwin. Jay Carter, thank you, Jay. Danny Anglin, thank you, Danny. Adam Smith from the House of Quark, thank you, Adam. Treva Jax, thank you, Treva Jax. Philip Poole, thank you, Philip. Dennis Koroshev, thank you, Dennis. Adam, thank you, Adam. Elizabeth, thank you, Elizabeth. Jamie J, thank you, Jamie J. Thomas Fitchett, thank you, Thomas. Jean-Paul Frenette, thank you, Jean-Paul. Matt Weaver, thank you, Matt. Ahoyerno, thank you, Ahoyerno. Kizzy, thank you, Kizzy. Michael Stipp, thank you, Michael. Kurt Ratz Productions, thank you, Kurt Ratz Productions. And Philip Coffey, thank you, Philip. Thanks to everybody for being my patron, whether you are a patron just this month or you've been a patron of mine for years, no matter how much you are pledging. I could not do this without you. I appreciate you all so much. Thanks to all of you for watching, no matter whether you're a patron or not, even if you just support me in the ways that don't cost anything by watching and liking and sharing and subscribing. I need all of that stuff too. I could not do it without you. I am so grateful to you for allowing me to do this and continue to do this work that hopefully means something to some of you. I appreciate you. I thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you next time.